Today we're exploring the subject matter of collecting data online, although when I say online it also might be in the public domain but from an obscure jurisdiction or something that's actually quite hard to obtain. I'm NATASHA DINKIN. I founded a company called Project Layers, which actually analyses that information and conducts due diligence on behalf of companies, charities and individuals. And my colleagues will be talking about their respective platforms which collate data from other sources. The main theme that we really wanted to talk about today is both the collation of that data, so where does it come from, and then what do you do with it in the analysis of that data, and also the challenges in obtaining that data. The technological advances that we've seen over the last few years have made online research much easier and much more fruitful, but that doesn't mean that it's without challenge, and we're not up against quite a lot of different problems when it comes to analysing that data, such as it not being reliable, it not being consistent, there being gaps in that information. So we'll go through all those different challenges at the end, but first of all we'll go through what each of us respectively does in this field. We've seen throughout this conference that something spoken about at length is the benefits of transparency, of an open society where people are held accountable for what they're doing, what they're up to, and the commercial transactions they're engaging in. Well, my colleagues here, so Chris Taggart and EDUARDO are really at the forefront of this battle. They're actually liaising with governments and companies and corporates to encourage them to open up, to publish information, to be much more transparent. And so really they're at the forefront of this battle against anonymity and discretion and secrecy. So with that, I'll pass to Chris, who will talk a little bit more about OpenCorporates, which is his database and platform that he founded.
What we're going to do is quick 5-minute presentations, nothing too much in detail, and then we're going to sort of do a bit of an interactive Q&A where we're talking about some of the issues that we face and some of the potential that there is, and then open it up to the audience. So I just really want to spend 5 minutes talking about OpenCorporates. We normally describe it as the largest open database of companies in the world. It is by an awful long way now. That was what we started calling it when we had about 5 million companies in there. So a lot bigger than that now. What we consider we're doing is building the underlying data set of all company data. Specifically around legal entities. We have over 90 million companies now. I think we're coming up to about 93 million companies in something in the region of somewhere between 105, 108 jurisdictions. We're adding new ones all the time, so it's slightly a little difficult for me to keep track of them. Not quite sure whether we'll get to 100 million this year. It'll either be late this year or early next year. We're very much focused on legal entities. When we launched about 4 or 5 years ago, people really didn't understand this aspect. They were like, tell me about IBM, what the quarterlies are for IBM, and I think that problem had been solved about 10 years ago. What hadn't been solved was this, what we think of as the ground truth of the business world, of the corporate world, which is if you think about what business is, it's essentially contracts. It's agreements between different entities. Whether it's a consumer buying something from somebody else, or businesses buying things, or financial contracts, but it's contracts, and it's contracts between things that have the power to enter into contracts, that have legal personality, and that's why legal entities are so important. So instead of going from the top down, looking at large companies, we decided to start from the bottom up, and that's the fundamentals of OpenCorporates. We take data from company registers from around the world. Everything we do is automatically ingested. We don't do manual imports. We basically write code to pull the information in automatically. We take those disparate fields, company type, legal form, business type, whatever they decide to call it, and put those in standardized forms. We make the whole thing searchable across every single jurisdiction. We also, one of the things that's particularly useful is many company registers don't give you ability to search by director. Of course, we not only allow you to search by director across, in a jurisdiction, but we allow you to search by director across all the jurisdictions we have directors for. And particularly when you're looking for individuals, or you've seen a company and you want to know the individuals and find out where else they're connected, that's crucial. Another thing we're doing is what I think of as automated triangulation. So, for example, in many places, foreign branches, or as Americans call them, foreign corporations, are critical. They're critical because they list actual business activity, but they're also critical because there are different reporting requirements in different jurisdictions. So, you can see the Cayman Islands directors on Companies House, for example, if there's a branch in the UK. In the US, where many companies are incorporated in Delaware, we now have about 3 million companies in Delaware. Very few companies do business in Delaware, and so they have branches in other countries. And so we're matching those together, and that allows you to have a much wider sample of information from each of those different jurisdictions. Our eventual target is every single piece of public data, company-related public data in the world, matched to the relevant companies. We're already doing this in areas like trademarks from WIPO. We're doing some work on UK government spending. We take corporate structures from the SEC and from the Federal Reserve's databases. We've had a big focus over the last over this year on US business and professional licenses. Some of that is not yet visible on the site. We're still just working on some of the underlying work on making that most useful and accessible, but that will be coming online shortly, and we already have something like 25 million of those. The next focus, which we've actually started work on now, is government gazettes. Government gazettes are a little bit of an underutilised resource because they often contain names of other companies, liquidation events, names of individuals, and so on. And that's some work that we're starting on right now. We should be seeing the fruits of that over the next 3 months or so. And also non-profit data. It's what we do, what data we focus on. I mean, there's a vast amount of data out there. It's very much driven by user demand, or where there's corporate structure information, which has got a wider benefit for the whole database. I'll just skip through this. We have an extremely powerful API. The reason that's important is that it's not just about whether you can search something on the web, and you can freely search OpenCorporates. We make no restrictions on the searches. Go ahead and search it without charge, without barriers, but increasingly it's about getting it as data. And so we have an incredibly powerful data API that allows you to do all sorts of stuff and integrate into your workflows or into your existing databases. I'll skip through that, and these are just some of the entities that using OpenCorporates that we have commercial relationships with. We've just got our second US government deal as well. And I'll pass over to Eduardo now. Thank you.
Hello, thank you everyone for joining this session. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Dato Capital is, and starting with why I do it. Like most of you, I've always been curious about information and data. Names also fascinate me. Since I was a child and I started reading my first books, some names caught my attention, others were difficult to remember, and there were a few that seemed to be chosen specifically to go unnoticed. A common and ordinary name is often chosen by writers to hide the fact that finally it was the key to everything. I imagine someone working at a tax authority reviewing hundreds of company names, and wondering who the killer is. Will the officer look at strong company names or anodyne ones? A question that arises from strong names is whether the image of the company is strong because of the name or if it's the opposite. I love James Bond movies and the mysterious corporations that appear in them, such as Orrick Enterprises, Osato Chemicals, Stromberg Shipping, and the common Universal Exports. I remember watching them and wondering what kind of figures were behind the companies, who managed them, and where did MI6 get the information from. It wouldn't be until many years later that I realized that they are in fact mysterious corporations nowadays. And I thought it would be a good idea to have them all together in the same system in order to solve the names dilemma. A no small feat for a computer scientist, information enthusiast, and James Bond fan. Of course, I did it because it could be a good business, but honestly, I also did it because I'm nosy about this information and I want to explore it myself. Mysterious corporations today have names that could be featured in spy movies, such as the opaque Mazzotto Foundation, which isn't available from Liechtenstein Corporate Registry Search, Lancia Group SA from the VVI, or Villa Scorpio Holdings from the Bahamas. You know, it's difficult to obtain information about these entities. Maybe there's not so much data at the source, but we catch them by their connections in other jurisdictions. I want all the corporate entities in the world to be in my database, such as Chris. But not only that, I also want to get all the digital information available for them with a single click. And that's what we do. Dato Capital is a website where you can search for a company or director, click on it, and get an updated report with a lot of information about the subject. It's designed to save you time. Some people question the need for corporate databases outside the official registers. In Spain alone, the companies that reuse public sector information have a combined €1 billion in revenue. A journalist asked me once why that money couldn't go to the government with a national information service, for example. There are many answers to that question, but let's say we are the private security of the information world. The police protects everyone, but in special cases you need extra help. Just the same as official registries, they provide a good service, but for some, like most of us, there's a need for more. I believe in open data and transparency. I work closely with government data sources in order to release more data sets and to fight the hiding of corporate information with laws like the right to be forgotten. That's why our website is also free to search and explore. Nevertheless, the costs for running a worldwide corporation database are large, and also the fees from obtaining documents from corporate registries, and that's why our reports have a price. At the lowest detail level, company documents are a commodity. Either they are free or priced. The added value for you is in the speed of delivery, ease of search, and how they are combined to give you the information you need as fast as possible. This is not easy with most corporate databases. Well, I have the data, but I need your ideas to obtain the most value of it. Like Richard Branson says, the worst speeches are the long speeches. So I'm going to finish now. Thank you.
So I'll be very brief in talking about project layers because we're going to get on to much more interesting topics. But just to give a really brief overview of project layers and what we do, as more and more information is becoming available online, and we've just heard about the sheer amount of sources that are being aggregated and the amount of information that's becoming more and more available to us, it's quite a confusing picture. And all the information that we're obtaining is from across the world, so it's global information. And if we thought it was hard enough deciphering between one John Smith and another, try all the many people that have taken their father's names or their mother's names in other parts of the world. It's really difficult to know exactly who you're dealing with or whether the company that you're dealing with is the same one that you're actually trying to do the research on. So we look at information and we analyse it. We analyse it for its reliability, its credibility, and what it tells us. So we work with charities who want to do due diligence or background checks on their corporate partners, on their sponsors, on their donors, and people that are actually carrying out the projects in the country that they're operating in. And we work with companies and individuals to find out more about who's on the other side of the table, to be briefed before a transaction or a meeting, and just to make absolutely sure they know who they're dealing with and what the risks are. Now, the risks really I define into two categories. There's regulatory risk, which is to make sure that the person or company that you're transacting with is not in breach of the regulations that you're subject to. So whether that's bribery and corruption legislation, which is onerous in the UK and the US under the UK Bribery Act and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or any other regulation, so they don't have the appropriate licenses or accreditations. And then there's reputational risk. And this is something which I think is overlooked by many, which is that if you and your association with another party or another person becomes known on the front page of the newspaper, how will that affect your existing clients, your existing donors, your share price? And the adverse effect this can have is actually quite monumental. So I look at all the information that is available out there and work out what is relevant. And it's incredible to see the amount that you initially think is really fundamental, it's really relevant. And the more you dig into it, the more you see that perhaps that really alarming article was over 10 years old. It may even relate to somebody else. These issues are in the past. And we'll talk a little bit about the right to be forgotten shortly. But the analysis is a really key component to this data. Everyone has a reason for looking, and we all absolutely love to go on Google and do our research, but we all have an agenda in mind. So it's very important to be aware of that objective. And these are just some of the types of information that are available online. It's vast. I've put a star by those that are covered by both of the platforms that my co-panelists have founded. And I think the real shift as a consultant and an advisor, and we all sort of perhaps are an advisor in some capacity, is that with this amount of information online, it changes the landscape somewhat, and it really alters the amount that we can have at our fingertips before we engage in a new transaction or we work for a new client. So with that, I'll move to the body of our session, which is really in three parts. We're talking about the hunt for data. So what data are we looking for? Which sources are we going to? And then the interpretation of that data, which is something that I do a bit of, so the analysis, and then the roadblocks to obtaining this data. And I think you'll find it unbelievable how many organisations, governmental organisations, corporations, actually put their foot down and try and block access to this information. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay. So I'll throw it to my co-panelists now, so Eduardo and Chris. If you could explain a little more about the sources that you do use. So are they primary sources, are they secondary sources, and which, if you can say, are the most obliging of governmental organisations?
Sure. So one thing that, one of the rules that we have at OpenCorporates is we only use public sources. And by public, we mean official sources or increasingly, but in a very small way, but increasingly in the future, the companies themselves. So we don't use news stories, for example. We don't use third-party proprietary databases. We only use the official sources themselves. That was initially company registers. As I said, now it's becoming information about licensing, information about gazette notices, official notices. It will be also things like trademarks, patents in the future. Essentially, if there's a public record on it, when you start going to this, you realise just how vast the number of sources are. Small business loan guarantees in the US, for example. There are 2 million federal communication FCC licenses, of which about 250,000 relate to companies. So there are so many different public sources, and essentially what you've got is they've got them siloed, unconnected to the companies to which they relate, and that's our job, is to de-silo that and to give you a much more 360-degree view of the company's activity. And one of of course the core is, does the company exist? Which is incredibly hard to discover in some places. For example, in Spain, you have to pay whatever it is €8 or €10 or something, to search for the company register to see if it exists. We actually run an index, a website in partnership with the World Bank, measuring how easy it is to get access to company register data. That's the foundational aspect, and then, of course, is connecting all the other things to it. One of the interesting things when you're dealing with governments is, of course, which ones are cooperative, which ones are not. Of course, when you're talking about government, there's no such thing as the British government or the French government or the American government or something. Governments are there's a wide variety of different departments. Different departments have got different views, and if you ask the Cabinet Office privately and FCO what they think about the Crown dependencies and overseas territories, you'd get different answers. So they have different views. Law enforcement has other views as well. In general, we always work hard to have good relationships with governments. I think we have good relationships with every part of the UK government. Companies House have been fantastic and great. We've been working with the French government, for about the last 2 years, helping them, trying to persuade them and helping them about opening up their data, their company register data, which should be happening any time now. We work quite closely with the US federal government, less so the states. But again, with some of the states, we've got quite good relationships. But it's kind of interesting in terms of, over there, they'll be saying, we had one conversation where I would say what the government was with the company register saying, over our dead body, we're not going to be publishing this data. And the other part of the government was, what can we do with getting this information open, because we want this to be open. We want this to be open not just for societal reasons, but we want to have this in your database so we can use it more effectively. So I think the first thing is to realise that when you're dealing with government, it's not just it's not just one, and I think that the clear direction of travel. So I was speaking at the European Corporate Registers Forum in Rome last year. I couldn't speak at the one in Abu Dhabi this year, and we'll be speaking at the one next year. Now, when 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, or 3 years ago, nobody was talking about, in the company registers, were talking about open data at all. 2.5 years ago, people were talking about it, but what is this thing, and does it, do we need to be doing it? The UK was the only one that was really talking about it substantively. A year and a half ago, it was, okay, I guess this thing is coming. What do we need to do in order to understand it? Now it's very much of, okay, let's try and do this, and let's try to be part of this movement. So open company data, freely accessible to all and reusable in multiple ways, is definitely coming, and governments have recognised that that's coming, and even the company registers, which have been laggards, are realising it's going to come. And I would be highly surprised if even some of what are thought to be secrecy jurisdictions aren't making information openly, freely available within the next 5 years. Thanks.
Our sources are more or less similar to Chris. We do a passive collection of public records, but also we buy information from the official registers and from other sources, independent, like banks with credit information. We buy this information in an active way. When someone requests information about a company director, we collect in that time the information. So we deal with a lot of public sources, and public but private sources and some private sources, but never the companies itself, because we don't trust them, because our clients don't want us to trust them. So we don't collect information about the companies, even they try to modify, to amend the records in our system.
I think one of the interesting things about OpenCorporates is that we're very much going out and getting everything that we can, subject to which things we're prioritising first. But the interesting thing about both Natasha, yours, and Eduardo is that in a sense you're much more record focused or project focused in a sense. And I wondered if the question, how far do you go, essentially? How much extra work will you do? Will you pull physical records? Will you, is there any data that is non-official, that is in scope, for example?
It's a really difficult question, because every time I conduct a piece of research, I'm subject to the client's objectives, so what they actually want from that piece of research. And typically, you'll have two types of people as clients: one that genuinely wants to find out who they're transacting with, and one that wants to potentially tick some boxes and feel as though they are conducting every necessary and appropriate check. So that's always a difficult dynamic. But the other thing that makes it very difficult to conduct research in the public domain is that it's almost limitless. You can be researching for days on end, hours and hours on end, and invariably you will find something the longer that you search, which makes the incentive for searching for a long time great. So it's a question of managing the sources that you're going to, and particularly if you're working for a client there are investigations which will only end once you've reached that answer, and that's something slightly different. But in the case of a normal background check, due diligence, KYC, you may be working for a client or a person who is concerned from a compliance perspective, and if you're doing due diligence on multiple entities and you're not applying the same level of scrutiny across the board, then that could potentially reflect badly, and the authorities could later down the line say, why did that company receive greater attention than another? Was there any hidden agenda behind that? So I think defining the parameters at the outset of a search is also really important. But in being consistent, certainly if there's not information available on one company because the information isn't online, we would seek to find that in the physical corporate registry that exists in that city and country.
Does that change from country to country as well, jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
Absolutely. So there are many, many jurisdictions where the information is still tucked away in some dingy corporate register, and you need to manually search for that, which is a laborious task. And some countries and cities where you simply can't get that information unless you are the company requesting it on yourself, or you apply through a very tedious process, or if you're willing to pay a backhander, which I'm certainly not, and all companies that offer these services should not do, because that's in breach of many, many different bribery legislation acts.
Okay. In my case, we offer only electronic information. So how far does one go? They want everything that is available, starting like a tree. For example, they ask for a Gibraltar company, and then they want reports on the nominee companies or the shareholders, and then the tree stops always at the same places, the BVI, the Seychelles, and whatever. But they want some clients, when they want to go far, they need all the electronic evidence about the company and all the related entities or individuals.
So, to sort of both of you, I suppose, as a user of these services, there are quite a few different databases out there. Some have been around for a long time, some are more recent, and so I was wondering sort of if you could explain the value add in relation to the sources that you use or the methods that you use to actually aggregate this information that compares it from either the primary sort of governmental source, be it a company's house, an OFAC's list, compared with what you collate.
So I think so one of the things that we do that's very important is that we're not trying to supplant the official sources. and in fact, one of the things that we do compared with the traditional proprietary, or what I think, data providers, the Dun & Bradstreets of the world, is that they're very much black box systems. They say, oh, this company has got an address here, or it's the parent here, and it's like, well, why do you think that? How confident are you in this? Where did you get this information from? Where did you get it from? And they won't tell you. It's just it's effectively, from a speaking as an ex-journalist, I mean, it's a lead, essentially. It's a possible clue, but a clue without much of without telling you where to go next. And what we're doing is we're actually saying that this. We're not saying that OpenCorporates says this. We're saying that this source on this date, on this time when we retrieved it from this, says this. And I think that there's a number of things that we're doing. Firstly, those registers are obviously jurisdictional based, but the world is not jurisdictional. The corporate world is not jurisdictional based. It crosses every single country, and any company that's of any interest, whether as an investor or as an investigator or a lawyer, is going to be in multiple jurisdictions. And that's the point of this, in a sense. And so to be able to look at that from a multi-jurisdictional point of view is absolutely critical. And to be able to say, okay, for example, we have a non-profit flag. Is this a non-profit or not? Now, there are different ways of being non-profits in different countries, but to be able to say, I just want to see non-profits, or I want to exclude non-profits, that's the sort of thing that you can only do on a multiple jurisdiction. And in the US, US is the classic one. I mean, we were speaking at the Miami OffshoreAlert event. So we've got, I think we've got currently 47 or so US states, and to be able to search those, in a single, on a single interface and get all of those back. Typically when you know that when you come across a US company, you don't know what jurisdiction it is. You don't know if it's a Delaware company or California company or Michigan company or whatever. And to be able to say, hey, look, I just want to be able to search that, or I want to be able to search names, or I want to be able to, search connected addresses and so on. That sort of stuff is really critical. So I think there's two things we're doing. One is just the nature of combining this together gives utility that you wouldn't get, and functionality that you'd be able to get elsewhere. The second is by normalizing it, it allows you to do much more complex filtering. And the third thing is and that, again, that functionality. Can you search by just can you search? Does it have to be the complete name in places, or does it have to be just parts of the name? And then I think the third thing is that increasingly we're what we're starting to now is to start to maintain much more historical records, and so that company changed name. So this is something that we aren't yet exposing, but that company changed name. Then what were the past names and so on, and what were the what was the former addresses of this director, and that's something that we're working on now. So that historical record. So I think that in comparison with the official records, I guess what we do in a sentence is make it useful, make it usable, and make it useful. In comparison with the traditional proprietary sources, what we give is clarity, an audit trail, provenance, and an ability to use and trust that data that you can't get with those proprietary sources.
Yeah, I agree with Chris that these are the three most important things, and at the end of as a conclusion is time for you that you can save, because it's faster to search on all websites than search for their corporate registry, log in, maybe sign a contract with them or whatever. And just one thing, increasingly we're finding government users of OpenCorporates. So, we had I guess a couple of months ago, we suddenly found a dozen users of the Thai tax authorities, or at least they had Thai tax authority emails,
had all signed up to OpenCorporates within about a week of each other, and were searching Thai companies amongst other things. And so, a year or so ago, we found that as well as the banks using us and so on, we had the Mauritius Department of Work and Pensions using us to search for Mauritius companies because it was the search functionality was better, it was faster, and it was much more likely to be online than the Mauritius register was.
It's quite alarming in a way. So I think something that we wanted to talk about was the reliability of the information, and you briefly mentioned amendments and modification to official sources. So something that I'm always concerned about when I'm doing online research is the accuracy of this data, whether it's outdated, whether there are maybe any inaccuracies, a spelling mistake in a director name, a potential inconsistency with the date of birth, something that would give me false positives or would lead me in the wrong direction. So what do you do about the quality and the accuracy of that information that's coming from even governmental sources?
Yeah, so we have these days, when we started off 5 years ago, obviously it was, there was just a couple of us, and we were, in a sense making it up as we go along, because there was no roadmap for doing something like this. These days, we actually have a fairly extensive QA procedure on data, any new sources, and data as it comes in. But there's a question of what we mean by quality as well. So the thing is that let's say that there's somebody who's got a first name, on the company's house register, they're a director, and they're spelled John with a Johne, for example. Is that a spelling mistake, or is that actually the record? Now, we don't feel that either it's our job nor is it the right thing to do to correct those errors, because we don't know whether they're actually correct. We don't know. In fact, there was a case of a Thai guy, a Thai man, in the last couple of days, who'd had to post his passport or official ID to Facebook online because they wouldn't believe that he had a real name, and so we don't know that. And also, to a degree, if you make a spelling mistake when you register the name of your company, then that's still the name of the company. And also, those errors are sometimes useful data points. We saw in the stuff that OCCRP was doing yesterday with Moldovan ones, the fact that there were spellings which appeared to be misspellings, which appeared to be data, which appeared to be deliberate, is potentially a signal, essentially. So, but on the other hand, what we do is we do some cleaning up. So, for example,